7.73. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.13. LBC weather, dry tonight with mostly clear skies. Some patchy light rain in the north with lows of 4. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8 o'clock on LBC. Welcome to Monday's Cross Question. Let me introduce my panel to you. To my left, Baroness Chapman, Jenny Chapman, Labour peer, Shadow Cabinet Office Minister. Next to her is John Penrose, Conservative MP for Weston-Super-Mare and Chair of the Conservative Policy Forum. To my right, Zoe Strimpel is a columnist on the Daily Telegraph. And to her right, Kevin Craig, who's Chief Executive of the Public Relations Agency PLMR and a former Labour councillor in South London. The number to call if you'd like to put a question to our panel, 0345 6060 973. Great to see so many people calling in already. You can text 84850 or say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And don't forget to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's go to our first question. It's from Jerry in Whitley Bay. Hello, Jerry.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel.
Hi.
I was looking the last couple of days at student debt. It's been rising exponentially. It's hit 200.7 billion. By 2040, in 2023 terms, it's expected to hit 460 billion. The question is, why are the graduates we need, particularly doctors, scientists, engineers, subsidising the people in society who get degrees that we don't need?
Well, this, of course, on the day that Keir Starmer announced that he would not be reversing tuition fees if he gets into power, or sort of announced that, which is one of his key election pledges. Jenny Chapman, let's come to you first on this. You were Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer during his leadership election. Owen Jones, if he were here, he would be saying, well, he's ditched virtually every single pledge that he made in the election campaign. Why has he ditched this one?
Well, I mean, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do? I think is the phrase. We're in a very different situation now. We're out of the EU. We've had COVID. We've had the kamikaze budget of last year. You know, Keir Starmer is not going to go into the next election making promises without being able to say where the money's going to come from. And, you know, on tuition fees and support for students, we recognise that there needs to be a rethink, because the situation as it is doesn't work. And we're seeing people leaving university with huge amounts of debt. We think it is making people make different decisions about what they might want to do, where, as Jerry says, you know, we do need people to train, to become highly educated so that we can compete as a nation globally.
But they don't seem to be put off by the current level of fees, do they? I mean, if you look at the participation rates, there's a sort of slow upward line on the graph, isn't there? Whereas I thought when tuition fees came in, you'd get a plummet, but it's quite the reverse.
Yeah, I mean, I see this in the northeast where I'm from, and I think what it is doing, it's making people, you know, take different kinds of courses and not necessarily the courses that are the ones that we need. So Joey's point, I think, is about, I think, it speaks to the lack of advice to young people before they make those really big decisions. So they're going off to university that they might not really know what it is they want to do at the end of it. And there's nothing wrong with that in some respects. But what I think is a problem is when they're going into something, imagining a particular course is going to take them somewhere, when actually the needs of industry might have taken you in a slightly different direction. And I think one of the problems that we've had without an industrial strategy in this country for the last decade is that there's no attempt to match up the needs of business and the future skills that we need with the aspirations of our young people. And it's leaving young people coming out of university, and I hear this from parents a lot, they're really worried about their young people taking on massive debts and not really getting the careers that they imagined that they would be able to aspire to afterwards. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done. Yes, we do need to look at financial support, but it's much, much broader than that.
Did you go to university?
I did go to university.
Did you know what you wanted to do when you went?
Well, I didn't think I wanted to be a politician. No, I wanted to be a prison psychologist.
Did you?
Which actually has come in quite handy at various points through my political career. But, my son went to university last September and has changed his mind and is now, he's been working in Pizza Express. He wants to kind of do different things. He wants to earn a bit of money, and I think for him that's probably the right way to go. But
Excellent.
he didn't
free
get
balls for life.
I think but the point is, it's about getting the right advice to these young people before they make these massive decisions, because you know what, if you drop out halfway through, you've still got to pay the money back.
Zoe Strimpel.
Well, I just want to just jump in on that, because I think Jerry raises an interesting point about, so let's call it bad degrees. But I think we have to be careful, because we completely lose sight in all of this rhetoric about the idea of learning because you actually have an intellectual quest to learn. So I did an English degree as an undergraduate, and I've done okay. I mean, I'm probably a lower earner than many of my friends, but I'm very glad that
working on the Telegraph?
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not, I have a very, but the point is, a degree like that gave me an opportunity to kind of think and learn in ways that I would never, ever have again, until I went back and did graduate work. But that's funded differently. So I think we risk being completely kind of instrumental about learning, and that is sad to me. That said, there do seem to be these lots and lots of these degrees which are a bit of a mishmash. So people go into them, maybe like business studies or, things that are kind of quasi-vocational, but are still taken as degrees. And then those are the ones that they come out and they think, hang on, I thought I was going to get a kind of one-to-one correspondence between degree, career, and then they don't get that. The final thing I just would say quickly is that I think in general, there's a misplaced emphasis on university in general. And I think socially, there's a big shift that needs to take place where the stigma is kind of completely, really as a matter of urgency, we work to get rid of that stigma if you haven't gone. And jobs should not say they require university graduates. I don't think it means anything. It completely depends on the degree and the person. And also to invest in sort of the other things people might want to do, because at the moment people don't feel like it's a genuine option for them to pursue other things. And it's partly to do with stigma, and it's partly to do with the requirement that they have a degree.
You're so right in that. I remember advertising for a PA many years ago saying a degree required. I ended up employing a 17-year-old from a comprehensive in Newport in Wales.
Exactly.
Who did a brilliant job.
There you go.
Kevin.
Well, I think I really liked what Zoe said about learning for learning's sake. So when I went off to university, the first, the Neil Kinnock thing, first in the family, Dad was a security guard, Mum was a dinner lady. 6 months later, Kevin from Lambeth is rooming with Digby from Eton, Gordon from Stowe, Steve from the Isle of Wight who wears white socks, and then going to lectures about the mother-daughter relationship in the French text. Now, I think that's wonderful. Right? I think that's life-changing. The horizons it opens up for you. And I've got colleagues I've got over 100 colleagues now in the business. And our apprentices, there's one young woman, Lucy Summers, recently, best digital communications professional in the country, apprentice, didn't go to uni, amazing. So I do, I trust what Keir Starmer's doing. I trust his integrity. I trust Peter Hyman, I think, who's doing work around him. But I do agree.
He used to be an education advisor to Tony Blair, who then went back into education and became a teacher again.
He's sensational, and he wrote a great book about teaching on the front line. But, I do feel guilty that my generation, I'm 50, 51, got it all paid for. I thought if I don't tell the truth, I'll get someone to bring it out in this kind world we live in. And I feel guilty at times that I had it all. Got the cheque from the local council, 3 times a year. So I want us to get it right as a society. But I do think there is value in all degrees. I don't like this rubbishing of some degrees. This life is long enough to work. The French are kicking off about pension reform. We're all living longer. So however we do it, I want us to fund a system that allows people who want to study the opportunity irrespective of where they come from.
Looking at the politics of this, though, given that Keir Starmer has ditched so many of his pledges in the leadership campaign, there'll be a lot of people, particularly on I don't know where you fit in the Labour Party sort of grid.
Sensible, desperate for change.
But a lot of people on the left of the Labour Party are going to look at this and say, well, he's done it again. He's reneged on the promises that he made.
They might do, but, I'm a bit of I need to go out more. I actually looked at the pledges he made, the 10 key pledges, and he's actually kept a majority of them, I would contend. And
Not according to Owen Jones.
Well, there's a lot of things that Owen Jones says
to
that I would disagree with. But I think, like Jenny said, you have to change and flex. And the biggest barrier we had to overcome, those that support the Labour Party, is that economic credibility went out the window, right? And when I go around campaigning, I hear that. So, yep. I'm popular with some, but, as Jenny said, if things change with them, and our economy is properly tanked.
OK, John Penrose, the economy's tanked. How much of an effect should that have on student tuition fees?
Well, Iain, I think you were right when you said that actually that the numbers of people applying to go to university has been rising steadily, and I, like you, and I think many others, was worried that they might decline when the tuition fees were introduced. But that's actually been quite the opposite. The number of people wanting
Which
to
is
go.
bizarre when you think about it, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
totally counterintuitive.
I don't pretend to understand it, but I'm profoundly grateful that that's what's happening. But I think Zoe is right to say that we need to make sure that we get rid of this sort of latent, historically inherited snobbery about British tertiary education, which looks down its nose at some sorts of qualifications and sort of, beatifies degrees no matter what. And actually, this point about getting good advice, knowing what your earning power is likely to be, knowing what your chances of getting a job are for this course at that particular college, and it could be being able to compare an FE college course with an HE college course and saying, what are my odds? Is it worthwhile taking on that much debt, or do I want to go for something that's cheaper and more employable that I might enjoy more? Having an informed decision when you're 18, or even if you're going to college later in life, and being able to tell what other people are getting is really, really important, not just for dispelling the sort of latent inherited snobbery, but also just to make sure that people take on stuff that they are comfortable with and that they're going to, this is a large chunk of the rest of your life, a decision you're making. So it's really important you've got all the information to get it right.
But also just, people should be able to just apply for jobs straight, 16, 18. I mean, as you said, you made a great hire. That, you don't always have to kind of weigh up. There's no kind of, I don't think you have to have any qualification. I mean, the qualifications is only as good as, I was just thinking also, I grew up in America. And it depends what model we're looking towards. A lot of the time we seem to want to be more like America. Britain always tries to ape America. We import a lot of ideas, bad and good. But then we sort of get more European on things like this. And still, to my eyes, like the tuition fees, while high and that salaries are much lower in the UK, so it's different, but they're still a fraction of what they are in the US. So it's it could be much worse. That said, the whole system has done huge amounts of damage to American youngsters. So, do
you think people liken the current system to a sort of quasi-graduate tax, but it isn't a proper one? Do you think that sort of putting, 2 or 3p on income tax at the lower and higher rates for graduates, including past graduates, would be a more understandable way of doing it? I don't know what the economics of that would be, whether you'd have to put much more than 3p on, but I think people would understand that in a way that they don't like the current system because it saddles 20-year-olds with a great deal of debt right from the off.
Well, I think colleges actually do a very good job of explaining to young people and their families what the financial commitments are that they're making. The issue I've got isn't that people getting the benefit of a university education should contribute towards the cost of it. The issue is that a young person, say in Darlington, which obviously I know very well, wants to have a career in that place, and they need to know when they're taking on that debt that what the local employment landscape is going to be like. They might want to know about apprenticeship options and other ways of getting their education, maybe spending part of their time in the workplace. That isn't well enough developed, especially in places like the North East, where those young people need it more than ever. Most of the apprenticeships in this country are in the South East and in London and in the major cities. They are not in the towns and in the regions. Because I don't think enough effort has been made. This needs the government to lead it. It needs the government to say to big employers and small and medium-sized businesses too, there's something in this for you. You've got a responsibility to future generations in your community. There's a self-interest that you have. When you go around a lot of the big manufacturers, you will see a workforce, mostly men, mostly over 50, there is a need to train and recruit the next generation of engineers. I think a lot of employers get that now, and they want to take part. They want to do more. They want to step up and do their bit, but they need a government to work alongside them with schools and colleges to make sure that the right people are doing the right courses for them and their families. And it just needs joining up. I don't think there's rocket science about this, but it is so much more than just about tuition fees.
Right, we'll move on in just a moment. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
God.
18 minutes past 8 on LBC. We have with us Conservative MP John Penrose, Labour peer Baroness Jenny Chapman, Zoe Strimpel from the Telegraph, and Kevin Craig, who is a public relations consultant with PLMR, which stands for what?
At the outset, it stood for Political Lobbying and Media Relations, because that's what we did. But that was 16 years ago. And I nearly brought champagne in for everyone, because today... Nearly. Then I thought it would look a bit PR, greasy man, you know.
I'd have put it with that.
Oh, we'd have forgiven you.
That's what we love about PR.
Note for next time, but because we started from one room in Lambeth, and today we broke into the top 50 in the country.
Oh, wow.
Over 100 staff.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so very happy and grateful.
You can't have the word lobbying in your company title anymore, though.
Well, that exactly. The acronym's much better, but we do loads more now.
Let's move on to another question. It's a text question from Johnny in Bromsgrove, who says, do you have any sympathy for the unions who are continuing the NHS strikes despite the workers actually being given a 5% pay rise today? Zoe Strimpel.
Whoa, over to me. Well,
I know you like a challenge.
Unless I've got this wrong, I think it's the nurses now who are continuing.
Well, it's the Royal College of Nursing and the Nurses in Unite who are wanting to continue,
right,
despite the Royal College of Nursing having said that their members should accept it, but they voted narrowly to reject it.
Yeah, so they're that's. I mean, I wrote a column about this recently, which may be why you've come to me. I mean, I always feel, as someone who sits around writing columns, one always feels a little bit awkward chiming in too much on what people who are sort of what they went through really in COVID sort of certainly does make one a bit more sympathetic, and obviously one has to have huge respect. I mean, I think there's a problem, and we're seeing. I mean, there's it's not coincidence, obviously, that this is a huge moment for strikes, and they catch, right. So it's a political moment as well as a moment of people feeling taken advantage of and underpaid. So to me, what's happening with the Royal College of Nursing seems a little bit to be about militancy, perhaps, and less about what many increasing numbers of members want. Midwives voted to accept the pay offer. There's a point at which people think.
But Pat Cullen, the leader of the RCN, who has been seen as a bit of a lefty, she actually recommended.
She did, but then she changed her. Yes, but then that was in March, I think, or February. But since then, that we've had the junior doctor strikes, and it's a chance to use forms of political rhetoric that might be quite, might get you quite sort of, might be a thrill. So I don't know. I mean, I think once you're, I personally have never striked. I'm not a member of a union out of principle.
Telegraph wouldn't like it, would they?
No, well, damn right. But no, absolutely not. But I can imagine it's quite a heady experience. So basically, I think, but however, it's all very well for me to have my political view. I do try to speak to friends who work in the NHS, in management in the NHS and doctors, nurses, and I get the impression that to some degree these strikes in the NHS, I don't know about all the other strikes, but these ones sort of do need to happen because there is obviously the crisis of staffing. How do you attract? Everyone's going to Australia, and what are we going to do? I mean, the whole thing. Are they really going to Australia? I sometimes wonder whether this is being talked up. I'd love to see the actual figures for that. Yeah, the figures. I was bringing it down to the figures. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, maybe. Okay, Kevin Craig.
Well, Iain, I actually take a slightly different view there in that I know that Pat Cullen's trying to get the members to accept the offer, but they're fed up. They've had enough, and they felt that there was a long time before the government got its act together on negotiations, albeit they seem to have now. And I think the reason that some of the membership are still hanging on is that they're thinking about the art of what's possible, and they're going to work every day, and they know, because it's public information, that every year between 3 and 4 million quid of our money is spent on nursing agency. Right, that's a fact. And I think.
Did you say million? I think you mean
billions. I meant, forgive me. Forgive me, I did 3 to 4 billion. And 3 to 4 billion. And that's the scandal. That's the scandal, that we can do better than that. And I think that the membership, as Zoe said, were clapped and appreciated, and they just, they're angry. And that's why some are hanging on, I think. But,
I mean, to be controversial for a second, the very same nurses who you're lauding are the people that are spending 3 days a week working in the NHS and then deliberately doing 2 days a week for an agency because they can earn more doing that. Now, I don't blame them for that. That's a rational economic decision.
It is.
But, I mean, there's fault on both sides here.
Well, but I actually, that's about individuals making, justifiable economic decisions. But the government, those in charge, we can do better than that, because politicians have the power to change. Jenny and John are there, and that just does not add up. Whoever's in charge, that amount of money on nursing agencies is crazy.
John Penrose.
I'd agree with that last point very strongly. I mean, the issue which successive governments, from Tony Blair on through, and quite possibly before that as well, have not dealt with sufficiently has been the levels of training of new medical professionals of all types and grades. And we just haven't been training enough doctors, nurses, midwives, anything, for decades. And as a result, you end up with the kind of shortages and therefore having to be filled by agency staff, which is what Kevin's rightly been describing. So we've started to deal with that over the last couple of years now. There's been an increase, quite a significant couple of increases in the level of people being trained, and that I think is better for the long-term health of the NHS. I mean, I actually think it would be better for the long-term health of the UK if we trained more medics than we could possibly use, and some people took those skills and chose because they wanted a global life to go and be doctors in other countries rather than us.
But we put limits on the amount of doctors that we're training, and
exactly.
Why?
And that's my point. We've raised those limits not just for doctors but for nurses and everything else recently. I think we should have done it 30 years ago, and we probably might need to do it again because we haven't been training enough people. And wouldn't it be great if the world was populated by, instead of us net importing medics from all around the world, we were exporting them? What a great piece of British influence and soft power if you're being treated by a Brit doctor.
And instead, we're leeching doctors and nurses from third world countries that actually need them themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I don't criticise them for coming at all, and for goodness sake, the NHS would fall over without them at the moment. But I just think as a long-term strategic answer to this, we've just got to train an awful lot more medics of all kinds.
Jenny?
Well, I think John must have been reading Wes Streeting's briefings.
I promise I haven't.
Because, this is precisely the problem. That we haven't been training enough doctors and nurses, and we need to train more urgently, because one of the reasons that the nurses are striking, yes, is about pay, but I come from a family of nurses, and it isn't just about pay. It's because they know that the care that they're able to provide right now, with the understaffing and the number of vacancies that there is and the pressure that they're under, is not the care that they were trained to provide, or that their vocation makes them want to deliver. And they're very concerned about what's happening in the health service. And we do need to. I mean, the Labour Party's put forward an idea about how you could raise the money from doing the tax on people with non-dom status differently, and using that to spend on additional nurses and doctors training places. I think that would be a really good start. But there are so many young people in this country, and we were talking about higher education just now, who want to be physiotherapists, they want to be speech therapists, they want to be nurses, they want to go into medicine. They're getting really good grades, but those places are not available for them at UK universities. That is wrong. And the fact that we are spending £4 billion a year on agency staff, that's half an HS2 every year that we're spending, and we don't need to spend. And those are opportunities and careers that we're denying our young people. That is wrong. The Labour Party has some ideas about how to go about that, and I'm pleased and surprised that John seems to be welcoming some of that, because this shouldn't need to wait for a general election. This ought to be something that we could get on and start to deliver now.
Right, let's move on to another question from Martin in Doncaster. Hi, Martin.
Hello, Ian and panel. Yeah, my question is what will constitute a success or failure for the Tories and Labour on local election night?
Well, it's local election night this Thursday. I voted today in a postal vote, and it's going to be very interesting to see what the turnout is, not least because of this new voter ID legislation that's gone through. Just by way of introduction to this, Sir John Curtis, he thinks that we shouldn't be looking at the number of seats lost in game, we should be looking at vote share. That, he thinks, will be the biggest indication of whether Labour are doing well, the Tories doing badly, Lib Dems doing well. Kevin, I don't know what studies you've conducted on this so far, because presumably your clients are sort of interested in these results.
Yeah, they are. There was, I can't remember, that one of the team did a briefing today, and I can't remember. There's is it the 1,000 seats figure that was chucked out as being a benchmark? But basically, will these results indicate in the, let's say, 100 seats that Labour needs to win to gain power, does it look like the party's on track? That's what I'm most interested in.
What's your gut feel? Because last time these seats were fought in 2019, the Tories lost 1,000.
Yeah.
I think Labour lost 100, which, given that they were in opposition at the time, was
well.
But
yeah,
we all know what was going on then. And the Liberal Democrats gained about 700. Yeah. What's your feel?
So my feel, because with my work, I have to go to the east of England a lot, where we have an office. We've got offices in Birmingham and Coventry, and my feel is that Labour's going to do very well. I think sometimes in politics you have a feeling, right? And I felt it when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, that I just thought this isn't going to happen. He's not going to win this election when the coalition came in. My hunch is that Labour are going to do very well, and that the public in many ways have kind of made their mind up. They're just a bit tired. And I would say that John is actually one of those really nice Tory MPs I really respect. He made a principled decision.
Enough.
No, he did. He did. He resigned in disgust, as I recall, out of Boris Johnson's antics in Partygate, and his partner has done incredible things for the country. But I think folks are just a bit tired. And the key question that I've heard a lot this week is: is it better than 13 years ago? Is it? If not, who next?
Zoe.
I mean, I think the point about being ready for a change is really key here. I mean, it's not healthy for a country, a liberal democracy, to have that many years of one party and to sort of lose the sense of reality about the opposition. I mean, they start to become just like part of a puppet show instead of something real. So I think on that level, probably the time is now. I think the other thing is the current Tory government, it's not 100% clear what their political philosophy is, right? So some of what they do, quite a lot of it is unclear where that falls within what should be Tory ideas about the market or about social matters. And there's a lot of talk in the culture wars, which is mostly where my focus is, about the odd outlying spat about things to do with gender or kind of free speech. But basically, I don't think this is a very sort of Tory government in any kind of meaningful sense, frankly. I think a lot of the rhetoric about levelling up and things like that seem to actually be coming from a bit more of a left-wing place, and therefore translated through the Tories just ends up being a little bit kind of off-putting, I think, for voters. So I think, I personally think it's a shame that Partygate became the thing it did become. I was never that. I didn't think it was as. I'm going to say I didn't think it was as bad as everyone said, everyone thought. However, it's part of this pattern of chaos and political illegitimacy, really, that kind of grew up. So I do think, although economically I'm never going to think Labour's right, and as much as they cleave to sort of some of those more Corbynite ideas about social justice, it meant in a kind of identitarian way, I won't go for it either. But I think there's a real case that okay, we were ready for something else, whatever that thing is, and let's like bust some stuff up.
I'm going to give Jenny and John a couple of minutes to think about their answers while we hear the news headlines at 8:31 with Charlotte Morgan.
In the last hour, it's been confirmed further UK evacuation flights will leave Sudan tomorrow morning. The Foreign Office says British nationals should go to the coastal city of Port Sudan by 10 a.m. local time to flee the violence. The Royal College of Nursing says it remains in dispute with the government and will ballot for more strikes despite its members getting a pay rise. They rejected a 5% offer but will receive it anyway after other unions representing NHS workers accepted it. And Lucy Letby, a nurse accused of murdering 7 babies at a hospital neonatal unit in Chester, has been giving evidence in her defence. The 33-year-old, who denies all the charges against her, has been in tears in court. LBC weather: dry tonight with mostly clear skies, some patchy light rain in the north and lows of 4.
LBC Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
John Penrose, Baroness Jenny Chapman, Zoe Strimpel and Kevin Craig with us answering your questions. 0345 6060 973. Now, we were you were answering Martin in Doncaster's question about what will constitute a success or failure for the Tories and for Labour on local election night this week. We've heard from Kevin and from Zoe. Jenny, what I mean, expectation management is always the game, particularly with the two major parties here, so we're probably going to discount anything either of you say on this, but...
But you're going to ask us anyway.
I mean, how well are you going to do, Jenny Chapman?
I don't know, Iain Dale. We're trying really hard. I think there is a sense, as we discussed before the break, that people are in the mood for change, and they think 13 years is a long time for a government, and they do want to show that... at the ballot box. I think people are asking themselves, are they better off now than they were 13 years ago? Is the country working better? Is the health service working better? Are the kids getting better educated? Is crime being dealt with better? And those are the sorts of conversations we're having on the doorstep. But, you know, it's a battle. And when the Tories say, we think we're going to lose 1,000 seats, you can bet your life they've calculated that they're going to lose less than 1,000 seats. Because, as you say, this is a bit of a dance that happens every time there are elections on. But, you know, we're focused on, you know, having those conversations, listening to people, trying, you know, working really, really hard, taking nothing for granted. It's looking promising.
But you're not counting your chickens till all the votes are counted?
We have no chickens.
No. John? How many seats are you going to lose?
And I'm going to echo Jenny here. I don't know. And you're right. There's this.
Have you got local elections in your seat?
Yeah, we have. Yeah. And we're trying to hang on to seats in my constituency and to ideally reclaim a couple in the constituency just to the north of me, which is Liam Fox's seats. And we might make a couple of gains with us too, but nobody is able to predict. And this is an absurdly wide range of between, as you said, between 1,000 losses and 250 losses. I'm sure the number will be somewhere in between those two, but goodness knows where it's going to be. That's just a weird, wide range to.
Now, I'm sensing the Greens might do quite well on Thursday. They often flatter to deceive, but they have gradually built up a reasonable base of councillors over the last few years, and several Conservative MPs that I've spoken to feel that they are going to make gains at the Conservatives' expense.
So the bit which is easy, sitting talking into a microphone in Westminster, to forget, is that actually there's this national backdrop, which Kevin and Zoe and people were talking about just now. But there's also, these are all local elections. This is all about how is my council doing? Is it doing a good job at picking up the bins? Is it doing a good job at filling in the potholes? And so there will be individual battles going on at local ward level. And some of those, it will depend on the quality of the local council candidate. And the interesting thing, as you say, is that in some places, what used to be a sort of Lib Dem preserve about sort of picking up a seat here and a seat there and sort of slowly building, the Greens have tried to sort of take that playbook and use it as well. But interestingly, I think certainly the Conservative Party's kind of got religion on this too. So we are out there talking about whether or not the traffic jam at that set of traffic lights it can be fixed or not, and that really is arguably more important than whether or not people are upset about a budget last year at a national level or not.
Kiers on a text says, good evening, Iain. One of your guests just used a wonderful word, identitarian. First time I've ever learned about that word. My phone keeps trying to auto-correct it. Great discussion. Well, you used that word. I have to say, I haven't heard it before. Is it something you've invented?
Oh, God, no. I would never invent a word as unattractive as that. Anyway, thank you to Kiz, because I'm also expecting, plenty of abuse for using such a long word. But no, it's just a very handy way of coming up with a one word, a bit like German style, for describing this whole cult of thinking about everything through the prism of identity. I'm this victim, you're that victim, the hierarchy of oppressions. I'm this, you're that, my identity is this, you're a challenge. That's all identitarianism, because it's all, instead of being about values or beliefs or politics or convictions, it's about this much more nebulous, offendable notion of the identity.
I'm now trying to think of the German word for it, which I might have to use Google Translate, but even though I speak German. Right, let's move on. Let's go to a text question from Sally in Manchester. Is the Sue Gray investigation just a hopeless stitch-up by a bunch of embittered Johnson supporters? Now, Jenny Chapman, you rejoiced
so tempted
under the...
to just answer yes.
Yeah. You rejoiced under the title of Chief of Staff to the Leader of the Opposition at one point. Sue Gray is apparently destined to move into that job. So I think you're the ideal person to kick off with this.
Well, just for the accuracy of your programme, it was Morgan McSweeney who was
I thought you were
Chief of Staff. No, I wasn't.
Oh, you should have been.
Probably, yeah. Anyway, no, probably just as well I wasn't. I'm not accusing anybody of a stitch-up or anything like that. I think there is a process, the Aqaba process, that's being undertaken, and Keir Starmer and Sue Gray have both said that they'll abide by whatever comes out of that. That's how these things have always been dealt with. I don't think it's right that the government should try and concoct another process which is clearly political, especially when it's 2 days ahead of local elections, to try and make more of this. I think there's a well-established way of doing it. And given that Keir Starmer said he'll abide by the outcome, I think that is the right process to be used.
I think there were legitimate questions, though, about the fact that Sue Gray was in charge of the Partygate inquiry while ostensibly, apparently, talking to Keir Starmer about becoming his Chief of Staff. I think from a civil service point of view, apart from the Aqaba question, there is a legitimate inquiry to be had there, surely.
Well, I think the process is there, and it should. And if there is a sense that there needs to be a prolonged period before she can take up her post, that can be discussed and decided by the body that's been established to make those decisions. We don't accept that there needs to be an additional process at all. We think that's what that body is there to do, and it might say, you know what, because the government's clearly submitted to Aqaba that it thinks there should be a prolonged period to reflect the specific circumstances in this situation. Let the people who are there to make those judgments, and don't try and superimpose some political dimension to this, because you're determined to make this into a huge political row. I can assure you, and I've been on the doorsteps of Darlington and other places over the last few weeks, this woman gets job has not come up once. I think we just have to let this run. If Aqaba
find that she has to wait 2 years, won't you then accuse Aqaba of being party political, given that it's being chaired by Lord Pickles? Well,
we've said we'll abide by that decision, and I don't know how much clearer you can get.
John Penrose, I suspect that the consensus on this panel is about to be shattered.
I think it might be. I mean, I should start by saying I've worked with Sue Gray, and whenever I've worked with her, she's been a model of being, independent and
me too,
and sensible, and nothing but respect for every encounter I've had with her. However, I think in this case, Jenny's only answering actually half the question. She's absolutely right that the Aqaba committee, which is the thing designed to make sure that when you leave the civil service there isn't a conflict of interest with your new job. She's absolutely right to say that that's got to do its work, and it may then require a period of sort of gardening leave, cooling off period, call it what you will, before Sue Gray starts her new role. But that's only half the issue, because the other question is, before she left, was she in a difficult position because she was becoming increasingly interested in and engaged in a potential future job with the Labour Party, and therefore increasingly finding it hard, or putting herself with potential conflicts of interest in the advice that she was giving to ministers potentially about how they dealt with attacks from the Labour Party. And that is something which, if that was the case, it's perfectly respectable for then anybody in the civil service to turn around and say, I've got a difficult situation, please will someone come and help? And at that point the civil service will say, you just step out the room, we'll get someone else to do that thing, and you act to sort of ensure the integrity of the process. I think the question which needs to be answered is, did that happen, or was it needed? And that's the other issue which I don't think is being properly addressed.
I'm going to ask both of you to be quite brief in your response to this one, if you would.
Well, no, good, because all I have to say is that, to me, it's just these investigations of inquiries with committees. It's just, this is a more of a comic point, which is that it does sound quite Kafkaesque.
We're inquiried out, aren't we? Yeah. Kevin?
Very eloquent by John. My view is, personally, it's a life belt by those who finally found something that they could, somewhere on the right, to chuck back at Labour, because they were so damaged by where I disagree with Zoe again, the terrible things that went on in Number 10 during the pandemic.
But the fact that they've been given this opportunity says something as well, doesn't it?
I don't think so. I mean, look, down the pub, civil servant who has, but you just said tonight, you voted earlier, thinking amazing people vote and have politics. Sue Gray had politics, but no Tory I've ever spoken to says anything other than what John said. But we are where we are.
Indeed, we are.
More committees, more inquiries, more...
Just what the world needs.
It's a stuff of cross-question, isn't it? It's 8:46.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
John Penrose, Jenny Chapman, Zoe Strimpel and Kevin Craig with me taking your calls. Now, we have a very suspicious listener who doesn't give a name, who says, why is John Penrose wearing a barely concealed earpiece? Well, obviously, because he's a Tory MP, he's not very clever, and Corey is feeding him all of the answers to every single question.
I wish.
The thing is that we're all wearing earpieces. Would you like to demonstrate your earpieces? And the reason is because that's the way they hear the callers. It's the way I hear the callers, because we don't like wearing these big clunking headphones. So I'm just sort of telling you how the sausages are made now. Right, let's go to another question from Chris in Croydon. Does the deplatforming of Joanna Cherry MP from Edinburgh over her comments on gender identity show that freedom of speech in the UK is fast disappearing? Now, the SNP MP was due to be interviewed on stage at the Stand Comedy Club during August's Edinburgh Fringe Festival. But the venue has announced that the event featuring her has been cancelled because staff there are not comfortable with her views and did not want to work with her on the day she was due to appear. Not her views on Scottish independence, I might add, but her views on self-identity. We're going to be talking about this in the 9 o'clock hour, so do get your calls coming in on this. Kevin, let's start with you.
I think it's very regressive. I think a few weeks back she was in contention, as I recall, for one of the major offices of politics north of the border. I don't I don't believe in it, and I think it feeds those. The front page of the Sun today was an example who want to suggest that we've got a problem with woke in this country and that they're all coming for us and all this. And I just think a decision like this is regressive. When I was at university, we had all sorts of speakers come, and it was one of the best things, you know.
I do apologise. This was actually a caller rather than a texter. It's Chris in Croydon. Chris, I hope accurately reflected what you wanted to ask, but I apologise for not going to you. Do you just want to add a little bit onto your question, give your opinion?
No, that was the main issue that I wanted to hear you deal with. Yes, that was it.
Right, well, I will look at my screen more carefully in future, I promise. Zoe, you write about these issues quite a lot in the Telegraph.
Yes, I do. And I'm not convinced that free speech is the most useful way to think about this issue. I actually have come to think that university culture is the issue. Campus, the elements of campus culture, obviously not all people at university or universities. So I think what we see it in America, we see it in Britain, we see it worse in America, actually, is a kind of insanity, right? That manifests in incredibly authoritarian behaviour, bullying behaviour. We saw it with Kathleen Stock at the University of Sussex. She was the original sort of gender-critical professor of philosophy there, who was kind of driven out. So I don't think that we can infer that that Britain or the United Kingdom is somehow, has problems with free speech. It's just more useful to think about why are people who are at universities so susceptible to what I think
this is not university, to be fair.
Oh, sorry. Well, in the arts, we could say. I was now actually just getting into something I've just been thinking about. But it applies across different. There are these sort of traditional outposts of this kind of thinking, universities, but also arts. Culture, things like that.
But this is even weirder than a normal deplatforming, because the Comedy Club is owned and was formed by one of her SNP colleagues, Tommy Shepherd MP. So there are lots of different strands to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a kind of nasty impulse to sort of turn on people that you shouldn't be turning on. I mean, we see J.K. Rowling has been turned on by the people whose careers she made, the stars of Harry Potter. So there's a kind of general, the sort of moral substance of things have sort of gone wrong. Like, people just become, they're all at each other. There's no loyalty. There's no sort of decency whatsoever. I think the other irony here is that the sort of self-ID policy that she's rightfully criticised was a complete disaster and extremely kind of immoral. So, I think the whole thing, but it just doesn't surprise me. This has been going on in various forms.
And whatever your views on whichever side you're on that, it's a legitimate matter for debate. It's not sort of one of these things where we know we wouldn't want to platform an overt racist or anti-Semite or at the Edinburgh Fringe, but this is not that kind of thing.
And maybe we would. I mean, the thing is, if it doesn't fall short of, if it doesn't incite violence, or if it sort of can be argued legally, then actually, speaking as someone who writes a lot about anti-Semitism, and I'm very, very sensitive to it, I actually still think you probably should let anti-Semites, you should let Hitler apologists, you need to be serious about what you mean by the law and then by free speech. And I think, we now have this sort of overhyped idea of safety, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's so unsafe to be exposed to these things. Well, firstly, it's not actually unsafe. Unsafe is when bombs are falling on you, like in Ukraine. And also you have the option not to go. So...
Well, the point here was that some of the staff at the venue decided that they didn't...
So they're ruining it for everyone else.
They felt uncomfortable.
Yeah. But then they should just lose their jobs.
Well, that's the point of view. Jenny?
I mean, I don't know whether something's gone on between Tommy and Joe that might explain some of this. I don't know the reasons behind the decision. I personally wouldn't have a problem listening to Joanna Cherry speak on these issues. I don't think I would be particularly corrupted or affected or offended by that. So it is, on the face of it, slightly surprising, but, it is up to the stand as well. They can make their own choices too. We can choose to go or not to go. The stand can choose to put on whatever acts it feels it wants.
These actions have consequences. Jackie Smith and I are looking for a venue in Newcastle to do our For the Many podcast.
I can recommend.
Well, it won't be happening at the stand in Newcastle. I'll tell you that for nothing.
We have some very good venues.
Excellent. Well, I'd love you to recommend some, because we can't find one at the moment. John Penrose.
Well, I mean, I'm sort of on the side of the free speech merchants because, I have to listen to some of the most unutterable rubbish in the House of Commons on a regular basis. But it doesn't mean to say that I start trying to bully people or shout them
Jenny's
down.
no longer an MP.
Oh, that was me.
and not meant either.
You can take it.
But the point about democratic debate is that someone can say something which you really strongly disagree with, which you think is complete tosh and utter rubbish, and the answer isn't to bully them, to shout them down or anything like it, or to try and deplatform. The answer is to explain politely why you think they're wrong. And to destroy their argument with logic and sense, and persuade other people that you're right and they're talking rubbish.
I don't think
that's got to be the thing, rather than sort of worrying about whether or not you actually get to hear the stuff in the first place.
Perhaps you can just accept that you don't agree with everybody.
And I think just to go back to what I was saying about the example of the rabid anti-Semite. I mean, I think there are grounds sometimes for conscientious objection to things. I mean, I probably wouldn't want to. I would think carefully about what kind of work I did for, but then I wouldn't expect to keep I would sort of quit and leave. And I think there are little frameworks in place for all of these things: how you behave when you're working for a company, how you express, problems with it, what kind of speech is legal, what kind of speech isn't legal. It doesn't all have to take the shape of these tantrums that happen all the time and are so ugly.
Some breaking news. The Metropolitan Police have said that a man has been arrested outside Buckingham Palace tonight after throwing items suspected to be shotgun cartridges into the palace grounds. Police say a controlled explosion has been carried out. We'll have more on that a little bit later. Thank you very much, Chris, for that. Let's take a call from Jim in Christchurch in Dorset. Hello, Jim.
Hello, Iain. Hello, team. We're being asked to make a pledge at the weekend on the monarchy. As I see it, it's the biggest referendum in our history, because if you want to make a pledge, at least over 30 million would have to vote yes, because we've got about 60 million voters in the country, 5 million probably under 18. So if you've not got a positive vote over 30 million, it would mean it'd be a negative vote.
Yeah, but how would we know, I suppose, if someone's made a Pledge of Allegiance? But we know two people that have. John Penrose?
So every member of Parliament who wants to take their seat has to take a Pledge of Allegiance to, in my case, originally it was at the start of this Parliament, it's the Queen, but it automatically becomes the King.
Because you had to renew it, didn't you?
Yeah, well, we didn't have to. It automatically renewed, but most of us chose to. Yeah, right. So I did. So I've got absolutely no problem with renewing it, and I plan to do so enthusiastically on Saturday. But equally, we are a free country, and if people don't want to, then they can stay sitting if they feel that way. That's what being in a democracy is.
Jenny?
I mean, I have as well, and I, did it very happily, and I think it's important to do the constitutional job, the role that I have, that I did that. I probably won't on Saturday, but I wouldn't read anything into that. I just think we're not being asked to, like, it's not a requirement, it's an invitation. And I don't have any judgment one way or the other on people, whether they get around to it, forget about it, too busy having their garden party. I think it's quite a nice thing if people want to, but I don't think it's a huge symbol of anything.
Zoe, at school in America, I'm assuming you went to school in America, you had to do this every day.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to this republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Something like that. Every day. I was born in this country, didn't even have an American passport at that point. Yeah, I mean, that's a different culture. Pledging for the Pledge of Allegiance to the King, sure. That feels better to me than the American Pledge of Allegiance.
Kevin?
I don't have a problem with it in principle at all. I think it's more relevant when folks have to do it in officially elected positions. But broadly, the monarchy adapts over time. I like Prince Charles. He was ahead of his time on environmental policies. I think he's a decent bloke. That's a tough gig, being a royal, by the way. And so I'm happy about it, and I wish him good luck.
By the way, it's King Charles to you.
What did I say?
Prince.
Oh. No way.
Yeah.
It's hard.
That's what happens when you get to 50, Kevin.
Oh. Hey, you're in up to Tower of London. Carry on doing that.
It's the start, I'm afraid. I can tell you I'm 60. Right, final fun question from Emma in Hove. A student at an art gallery in South Korea saw a banana taped to the wall as part of an installation, but he felt hungry, so he ate it. Which major artwork or sculpture would you be more than happy to remove from public view immediately? Now, I know, Jenny, you're very keen to answer this question.
I'm not, because I don't... know the first thing about art. So I wouldn't put myself as the person to be the judge of what should be removed and what shouldn't. I quite like seeing bits of sculpture around the place. Wouldn't claim to be able to interpret any of it. So I'm probably the last person who should be answering this question.
So you're not going to answer it?
This is a politician saying, I don't know.
John Penrose.
Am I allowed a building?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, well, there's a brutalist building called the Centre Point in the middle of London, which I hate with a passion.
Isn't that where the CBI live?
That's not
I've no
art,
idea who's
though.
actually. Well, I think it's actually a listed building. I think it might
he's
be
on
a
a
listed,
pivot there.
I think it might be a listed building. But if I could empty it of all people first and then put some TNT under it,
particularly the CBI, given recent events, Kevin.
Well, I stand to be corrected, Ian, but I believe that the Tate, who we all I suspect love and admire, back in paid over £20,000 for an installation which was by the Italian artist Piero Manzoni, and it was a tin of his own excrement at a price equal to its weight in gold. And I'd go back and I'd try and get a refund on that 20 grand. But one of the best stories from art ever that my dad told me because he came home late from a night shift.
Right, Zoe, do you want to SH1T and get off the pot?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I was just thinking how much I appreciate someone eating the banana from the thing. Yeah. They're hungry. Great reason. Mine is probably two. One would be the meeting place in St Pancras Station, which shows this kind of couple in each other's arms, and it's supposed to represent the romance of travel. It's a recent sculpture by Paul Day, and I'm just thinking, the romance of travel, try like incredible stress, hauling thing, being late, not being able to find your ticket, etc. So that one really annoys me, and it's quite tacky. And then poor old Mary Wollstonecraft, who's obviously one of the most amazing women to have ever lived in Britain, has this hideous sculpture that was supposed to pay homage to her by Maggie Hambling in Newington Green. And I don't want to take Mary Wollstonecraft out of public awareness, but it pains me that that's supposed to be the kind of memorial of her. Not memorial, but...
Well, you did two, so Jenny didn't have to do one. Well done. Thank you to all of you. Really, really, really interesting hour. Thank you to John Penrose, to Zoe Strimpel, to Jenny Chapman, and to Kevin Craig. Coming up in a moment, we're going to go back to the subject of Joanna Cherry being cancelled by the Stand comedy venue in Edinburgh at the Edinburgh Fringe. She was due to take part in an In Conversation interview, but they pulled the event because some of their staff feel a bit sort of hurty about the fact that she was going to speak there because of her views on self-identity. Joanna Cherry is an award-winning King's Counsel. She is a really interesting politician. She is an elected politician. What are the free speech implications of this? I mean, does any elected politician deserve to be cancelled in this way? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. In the last hour, police say they've arrested a man outside Buckingham Palace. Officers say he's suspected of throwing items thought to be shotgun cartridges into the palace grounds. More British nationals in Sudan have been given a chance to flee the violence after the Foreign Office confirmed more flights. They'll leave the coastal city of Port Sudan tomorrow morning, around 500 miles from the capital, Khartoum. 28 previous RAF flights have previously left the country, rescuing more than 2,000 people. NHS workers in England will get a 5% pay rise from next month after backing the government's latest offer. 12 of 14 health unions voted to accept the deal. Former chair of the NHS pay review body, Jerry Cope, says those who rejected it will still receive the increase.
That's almost essential because you've got people in different unions on doing exactly the same job on the same grade. And if you didn't pay it to everybody, you'd end up with people working next door to each other who happen to be paid differently just because of the union they happen to be a member of.
Members of